Been a while since we've seen Joshua make something, and today we're going to be seeing how he makes his tonkotsu ramen. We have remade a few recipes from Joshua, and if you haven't seen those videos, then be sure to check those out after seeing this one. But if you do happen to enjoy this video review, then be sure to give it a like and a share, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Now, let's get started.
This ain't no gimmick ramen. We're making real deal, traditional-ish tonkatsu ramen. But before we start, you're gonna wanna go ahead and take any instant style ramen in your house and you're gonna wanna put that right in the trash. Okay?
This is gonna be one of Joshua's old videos. Me personally, I prefer the old ones because they're slower paced. They're more step-by-step on the process, and it's very easy to follow the recipes.
Tonkatsu ramen. There are many different types of ramen, but today we're talking about this one in particular. Tonkatsu is a Japanese ramen that consists mainly of pork bones that are boiled for a very long period of time. This is what results in the mouth-watering, rich and creamy tonkatsu ramen that so many have come to love.
Joshua is right about this. If you go to Japan, and I still haven't, and I would love to visit, but if you go to a ramen shop, you will see like more types of ramen than you would even think exists. There are so many specific types of ramen. There are types of ramen that are made with specific parts of the pig, the broth. Now the title of this video is Tonkotsu Ramen. This is with Chashu. But what Joshua has been saying and then what he just put on the video was Tonkatsu Ramen. Now if I'm not mistaken, these are different. I believe tonkatsu is with a pork cutlet. Stay with me, it gets complicated. With ramen, there are many important elements to make a good ramen. The broth is one, noodles are another, tare, which is another very important element with flavoring the ramen. And of course, you have the aroma oil and toppings.
First thing, we're gonna start with our broth. I've got 3 pounds of pig's trotters here, skin on, fat on, all that. I know they seem gross, but this is a really old school ingredient. People have been using this forever. So anyway, 3 pounds of pig's trotters go straight into a large stock pot. I wouldn't recommend any other substitutions, especially not chicken or anything like that. The pig's trotters have the perfect ratio of fat and skin that you need for this broth, and you can get it anywhere. Most grocery stores carry them, and if you don't wanna go to a grocery store, go to an Asian market.
Now you don't have to just get pig's feet or pig's ears. You can also use other bones, but it is a good idea to get bones that one contain fat and also collagen. So if you do happen to get like spine or nothing else, knuckles is good.
You're gonna fill that with enough water to cover about 2 inches above the bones. Then you're gonna bring that up to a rolling boil for 10 minutes. Do not skip this sort of blanching process. It is essential. Now, while this 10 minutes is going on, you're gonna notice some foamy sort of like scum rise in the top.
Now, Joshua's doing a step that we've seen in many Asian recipe videos where they actually blanch the bones first. Now, what the blanching does is help to draw out a lot of the impurities from the bones. We don't do this in the Western kitchens. We normally roast the bones first and then make the demi-glaze or sauce espagnole or any of the other sauces that we're going to make in the kitchen. Now, one tip, if you are going to be blanching the bones, I would suggest to leave the bones in cold water to help draw out more of the myoglobin. Put it in the fridge the night before and then drain that off, because it will help to draw out a lot of that color which you don't want in the stock or the broth.
And you're just going to skim that off the top using a mesh strainer or a spoon. It doesn't really matter. Use whatever utensil you have, no big deal. Try not to remove too much of the liquid though. We're looking just to get this scum off the top. And you're just gonna continue that skimming process until the 10 minutes is up. Once that's done, you're gonna strain the bones out through a colander. Once you strain them out, rinse the bones with cold water just a little bit, kind of like getting the excess scum off the outside and, you know, making the bones look nice. You don't need to clean the insides of them out, just clean the outsides and make it look decent. Put them back in the pot and cover with water.
Now, as Joshua is doing, you want to take the bones and you want to pour out the liquid. He is discarding the liquid. He's not saving it.
Now to that pot, you're gonna add 1 whole bunch of green onions cut into 3-inch segments. 2 medium-sized shallots cut into quarters with the skin still on. If the root bottom's really dirty, you can take it off, but you know, I just leave the whole dang thing intact and just toss it in. 1 large yellow onion cut into quarters, and 2 3-inch knobs of ginger peeled and sliced.
Now what it looks like Joshua's doing is he's starting the boiling process and he's adding the aromatics early. He's adding them before actually cooking the bones. Typically, you add the aromatics late. I mean, you can add the onions because they take a while to cook, but adding any of the other aromatics early can lose a lot of the aromas that the aromatics add to it. So it's best to add them later on in the last stage of the cooking process instead of at the beginning. Then again, if you just want to get it done, Just throw everything in the pot and cook.
I also added about 4 cloves of peeled garlic in there too, just completely unsliced. I left them whole with the skin off. Bring that up to a rapid boil over high heat, and then once it's at a boil, lower the temperature just enough so that it maintains a boil at the lowest possible temperature. Do not reduce it down to a simmer. It must be at a boil. Now, once you've done that, add a lid and let it go for 12 hours. That's right, you heard me, 12 hours. Now, during that 12 hours, you're going to intermittently stir the pot to keep the pork from resting at the bottom and then sitting at that hot bottom and sort of like burning. You don't want that to happen. They'll burn and they'll stick. So make sure that you stir it intermittently throughout that 12 hours, maybe like once an hour.
You do want to continuously boil it because this helps to emulsify a lot of the fat and the rest of the collagen that are in the bones with the water.
I know 12 hours seems like a long time, but just schedule yourself accordingly. So start it at 8 in the morning, it'll be ready at 8 p.m. It's pretty simple, very straightforward. You could also do it overnight, but I prefer to keep an eye on it, so I do it in the morning. This is a really fun and therapeutic cooking project, so I actually really enjoy the mornings of starting this. It's a lot of fun, and that's my opinion. Also, during that 12-hour period, you're gonna wanna intermittently add a little bit of water just so that it doesn't reduce all the way. So as it reduces, whenever it reduces halfway, add more water and fill it back up and continue boiling.
Ooh, 12 hours today. That will be a very expensive electric bill. What I would suggest instead is to get a pressure cooker, and you can cut the cooking time of making the broth literally more than in half. But if you are going to be using a pressure cooker, just be very careful and make sure you have a good one because they can end up being a little dangerous.
Now, for the protein portion, if you're feeling extra ambitious and you want to do this super traditionally, you're going to make Japanese chashu, which is soy braised pork belly. Now, it braises for about 3 to 4 hours, so in the grand scheme of your 12-hour process, you might as well just go ahead and have it going while you're waiting. To me, at that point, you might as well just make the chashu. So, you're going to start with a whole bunch of green onion, and you're going to cut it into 2-inch segments yet again and place that in a deep bottom cast iron pot or any oven-safe pot with a lid.
If any of you haven't seen how Jamie Oliver makes his ramen,
falling off the bone, let's plate it up.
You need to see that video. Like, you have to see it because the way that he butchered making the chashu, or actually the ramen itself, it was absolutely horrific. It was funny as well, but horrific.
Now we're gonna peel a 2 to 3 inch knob of ginger. I like to use a spoon, as I said before. This is how you do it. And then you're just gonna slice that about 1/4 of an inch thick and add that to your pot. Then add 4 to 5 cloves of whole peeled garlic. To that pot, you're gonna add 1/2 cup of sake and 1/2 cup of Shaoxing cooking wine. If you can't find Shaoxing, just use 1 cup of sake total. 3/4 cup of mirin, 1/2 cup plus 2 tablespoons of soy sauce or tamari, and 1/3 cup of just water.
Now Joshua is doing good, and I say this in every single video, well, except for the paella video that he made. That was a little bit of a weird recipe, but in any case, you can tell that Joshua does an excellent job.
For this braise, you're gonna need a 2-pound fresh pork belly with the skin on or the skin off. It's up to you. I like to have the skin on, but you can also take it off.
Now this is the very crispy bit of pork that is added to the ramen at the end, and it's super delicious. What Jamie did in his little video is he boiled the you-know-what out of it, and it looked paler than an Englishman in winter. In England during the winter, you can tell who goes on holiday because they normally have a suntan.
And you're just going to roll it up lengthwise all the way up until you get a nice log. Roll it nice and tight as you can. Now to hold it together, you're going to use kitchen twine to tie it off into 3 separate segments along the entire piece of pork. And you're going to repeat that process on the opposite end piece and the middle. This is really just to hold the pork together.
Now, if you're wondering why did Joshua tie this and is it a necessity, it helps to keep the shape, like he said. For a pork belly this size, I would suggest using more ties than just 3 little knots. Do it a couple more times and try to make them consistent because you'll leave the marks.
Now you have a pork belly roast that is ready to braise. Now just lower your pork roast into that pot that we just set up, bring the liquid up to a boil, reduce it down to a simmer, cover loosely with a lid, and place in a 300-degree oven for 3 to 4 hours or until it's super tender and delicious.
If you're gonna be using the pork belly with skin on, I would suggest the skin on because then you can get it super crispy and then it's crispy crunchy at the end. Very tasty. I would suggest to make sure first that the pork skin doesn't have any hair. This is very important because some of the butchers around here, they don't do like a very good job and they leave hair on it, and then you have to take a torch and burn it off. This is a big important thing. Secondly, Joshua made a nice little marinade that he's going to be marinating the pork in, where he's going to be braising it in that. It's going to give it the flavor and color. I would suggest to mark the pork belly either with a fork or with a knife, something, but mark it. That way, if you do mark it, because they do tend to be quite thick, it just soaks in all that marinade that we have for the chashu. It makes it extra tasty.
And if you're feeling extra fancy, you can baste it and flip it around every 30 minutes or so to make sure it's thoroughly coated in that sauce. Now to prepare our remaining toppings. So one of those is going to be thinly sliced green onion greens, not the whites, but just the greens. Some dried shiitake mushrooms rehydrated according to package instructions, which in my case was 2 cups of hot water, poured directly over them and then covered with plastic wrap. This plastic wrap method causes surface tension, which keeps the mushrooms submerged.
Oh, what a difference between this and Jamie's video. It's like night and day.
Get ramen! You say you want to make ramen!
You have to go see that video, and if you've seen it, you need to go see it again. Get a laugh out of it.
Slice up some nori into 1-inch by 3-inch rectangles. And here's a quick little method for the coveted soft boiled egg. Very simple. Bring some water to a rolling boil, drop in your eggs with no lid, and then reduce the heat so that it's a gentle boil rather than a vigorous boil, and boil your eggs for 6.5 to 7 minutes. Pull them out and immediately drop them into an ice bath. Allow to cool to room temperature. To serve these eggs, you'll just peel them and then slice them in half. And here is a cross section to prove the beauty of the jammy soft boiled egg.
Now that is a beautiful soft-boiled egg. Beautiful.
All right, and now we're gonna make the tare. This is the most important piece to the flavor complex of this ramen. We're gonna start off by making a very non-traditional dashi. So before anyone comes at me about how this dashi isn't right, I know this is more of a quick dashi. You can certainly do it the old-fashioned way if you prefer.
As Joshua was saying, this is the tare, and this is the flavor element in the ramen. The broth has its own flavor. This is a part of it, but the tare is the seasoning. So this is basically like the umami or MSG as well. And it makes it super flavorful, also very salty.
To a small sauce pot, add 3 2-inch pieces of kombu. This is a relatively easy to find specialty seaweed. You can get it at most grocery stores or you can buy it online. I'll have a link below. To that, you're gonna add 3/4 of a cup of water, and then you're gonna turn the heat on to medium-low and bring it up to a steamy heat. Do not boil this liquid. Just bring it up to a steamy heat, turn off the heat, and let it steep for 10 minutes.
True, if you can't get it at your local store, and if you don't have a local Asian store near you, you could try it online. This is always the case. Sometimes I have to do this, or even with Amazon. Amazon doesn't have everything. Now, there are different ways on how to make a good tare, and if you do want an easier method on making one, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you just want like an introduction on how to make it, or even ramen for that matter, I would suggest going over to The Way of Ramen, the YouTube cooking channel. He does a great job. And check out some of his videos.
Then you're gonna add a half cup of bonito flakes and let it steep for another 5 minutes. And it'll be the same thing with the bonito flakes as it was with the kombu. You can find it in most stores or there'll be a link below. In general though, I would say for this recipe, an Asian market is gonna be your best bet because you're gonna find pretty much everything there. Once that dashi's done steeping, pour it through a fine mesh sieve into a medium-sized bowl. To this, you're gonna add 3/4 of a cup of soy sauce, a 1/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons of mirin, 1/4 cup of that chashu braising liquid optionally, and a 1/4 cup of the rehydrating liquid that you use for the mushrooms. Then you're gonna give it a stir and lightly season it with salt. Now we want to salt it because you want it to be pretty salty.
Or a little bit of MSG. In Jamie's video, he didn't really make the tare. He just basically added miso paste. And that was it. Oh, I shouldn't tell you everything, but in any case, he added it. He didn't add it at the right time either.
Now to assemble our soups. So first things first, you're gonna need to start by cooking some ramen noodles. I like to use the straight kind. And you're just gonna cook those in boiling water as per your package instructions. Every single set happens to be a little bit different, so just follow whatever the package says.
And for Pete's sake, don't use soba noodles. Whatever you do, especially if you're gonna be making a YouTube video on it. Otherwise, Uncle Roger will get you.
Slice your chashu into 1/2-inch thick rounds. Be sure to give yourself a little taste test and then almost pass out because it's so good. Now, if your chashu is cold, you can always reheat it in a pan and get it a little bit crispy on that side. That's always a great way to go.
The chashu looks good, much better than someone else's. One thing I would suggest though, when slicing it, is to cool it down because when you cut it hot, the meat's going to be quite loose. If you chill it, the meat will be tense and it'll be a lot easier to cut it thinner. And you don't want to cut it thick, unless you just like to eat a lot of chashu. Remember, this is going in more of a broth. You're not going to have a fork and a knife and you're not going to be cutting it up. So it needs to be a little easier to eat.
Now we're gonna build our bowl. So you're gonna start with a good amount of spoonfuls of your tare. You can add as much or as little as you like. It's purely up to your preference. Just season it however you want it to taste. in saltiness and flavor. Now at the 12-hour mark, your broth should be ready. It should be creamy in appearance, and then all you need to do is just strain out the bones. Obviously, I forgot to film that portion, but you get the idea. Now once that's done...
That happens to me too. A few cooking videos, I forget to do a step, and then, you know, at the end, it's how it is. You have to either remake everything or just admit that you messed up.
You're gonna pour your hot broth into your tare-filled bowl. Be sure to taste it before adding your remaining ingredients to see if you need to add more tare. Add your cooked noodles, a nice slice of chashu, or 2 if you're like me and have to be extra, 1 of your soft-boiled eggs cut in half, some enoki mushrooms if you have some. If you don't have any, no big deal, I just like to add them. Your thinly sliced green onion, your sliced rehydrated shiitake mushrooms, and 2 little rectangles of nori.
That looks beautiful. Uncle Roger may have a little something to say about the mushrooms. In general, he doesn't tend to like them, but I have to say that that looks very good. Again, if you are a ramen expert, I'm sure there are a lot of things that you can nitpick about it, but at least for somebody that is not a ramen chef making something that looks like this, and it probably tastes really good, Joshua, I think, did excellent.
So it's done. Tonkatsu ramen, including the coveted chashu that everybody is about. You know what I mean? I know this recipe is lengthy and involved, but the technique overall and the actual amount of knowledge you need of cooking is rather simplistic. It's pretty straightforward. It just takes time. With that said, this is definitely a weekend project, but it's one that's super fun and it's completely worth it. Genuinely worth it. It's very rewarding. Not to mention, a lot of the time for this broth is completely inactive, and you can pre-prep all your stuff at the very beginning and then just let the broth go. So I mean, you know.
That was a good video. My final comments for this was very good. Joshua did an excellent job. Again, if you want to see a ramen chef make it more like traditional, one ramen or the other, then there are many different chefs out there with YouTube channels as well that make it more like this. But when looking at Joshua, especially one of his older videos, when he was still like experimenting with some of these recipes, he did an excellent job, but absolutely excellent. And actually, I'm surprised Uncle Roger hasn't reviewed this video because it's a good video. So if you did happen to learn anything or you happen to enjoy it, then please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. Also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram if you are on there. Be sure to click here as well on the next video coming up, and I will see you again very soon. Until then, take care.